Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, investing all of your ASCAP royalties into Bitcoin, or else a scrappy upstart, investing your tips from SoundCloud into Dogecoin, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the second Friday of October 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made. And it would always be some guy named Robin who drove a Ford Explorer with a lift kit and a Mogwai bumper sticker, and who was always trying to sell you what he claimed to be Molly, but what was actually just crushed up Excedrin. And old Robin would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days and use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on YouTube for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream that I do. I'm live. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I think that we're building something of a community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. Every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you just choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you for everybody who's chosen to do that. And if you're not in a place to do that financially, I totally get it. You can still contribute to the show for free by first leaving us a rating in the iTunes store, preferably a 5-star one, or second, simply telling a friend about the show, spreading the word about the show. The simple math on those two last things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope you enjoy this week's chat. My guest this week is a legend in the Austin, Texas music scene and also a journeyman in the American folk music circuit. Matt the Electrician grew up on the West Coast, but then made his way to Austin in the late 90s when the town was still avowedly weird. He got his start playing open mics at night while wiring up houses during the day to make ends meet. Austin is a city where live music is king, and many musicians in the capital city make their livings by playing one or more weekly residencies. That's the path that Matt himself took away from the job site and into the concert hall. Eventually, he took his music all over the world, playing the folk music circuit all the way to Japan and Alaska. His songs have been featured in television shows on ABC and the Lifetime Network, as well as the NPR program This American Life. He's toured with Bob Schneider, the Weepies, Tom Freund, and many others. His sound has been described as a young Paul Simon wrapped around a Tom Waits heart. No Depression has marveled at his ability to capture everyday feelings and situations with a naive, straightforward gracefulness. And the Austin Chronicle says that he populates his songs with an endearing parade of characters. Matt and I have been friends for years, and it was a treat to catch up with him on the phone last week to hear about his journey so far. Matt the Electrician, thanks so much for coming on the Working Songwriter Podcast. I want to start by talking about you arriving in Austin in what was probably the late 90s, early 2000s. When did you get there?
May of 96.
May of 96. So you were entering the Austin that I thought I would be entering, a decade and a half later, but I didn't find it there. You were entering, in my mind, the Austin of, the famous Daniel Johnston performance on MTV at South by Southwest, this, genuinely keep Austin weird kind of small community. I mean, in my mind, that's the Austin that you were entering at that time. Did it have that feel when you arrived there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure some of it's wrapped up in just being young, but it really, really was pretty magical here. And I had no idea what I was, in for, because I was kind of blissfully unaware of Austin and any of its background, and I just did a thing that you can only do really when you're 23 or 24, is I just moved across the country to a town I had never been to just 'cause.
Yes, man. No, that's such I pretty much did the same thing. I'd been to Chicago once before I moved there, but yeah, I mean, I kind of moved in cold, and I'm so glad I did. I feel like that move taught me 90% of the things that I needed to know in life.
Yeah, yeah.
So what did the town, like, give people an idea of what it took to get up and running when you move to a town and you're 23 years old and you don't know anybody or anything. Like, how did you get your life up and running at that point? Not even the musical part of it, just your existence.
Um, I had much like yourself, I had some construction background. I had done framing, carpentry. My dad's a lifelong contractor and carpenter. So I had my tools. That was the main thing, is I knew, like, I got my tool belt, I got my saw, like I can go get a job anywhere. And I
Yep.
think that made it feel, on the way down, I had already stopped a couple times and done a little work here and there. And so I thought, okay, I can just drive into a town, I can get a job. And I had a friend of a friend who let me stay on his couch for a couple weeks. But I rented a room and I got a job, turned out as an electrician, which was kind of a weird curveball, because most of my construction experience was framing. And I got down here and it was May, like mid-May, and I was coming from Oregon, where mostly I had done construction work in like 20-degree freezing rain.
Right.
And I got down here in May and it was at like 100 degrees already. And I, and I spent a quarter of a day on a framing job site, and then I just left. I didn't tell anybody, and I just drove away. I was like, I can't do this. I need to work inside. And in my head, I had helped an electrician for like half a day when I was working for my dad, and so I thought, oh, I can be inside. That'll be good. I'll be
Yeah.
inside. I didn't think about the fact that you're still inside, usually in a place that doesn't have electricity. So it's actually hotter, but you just don't have the direct sun on you. But yeah, so I got a job within about 2 weeks. I got a job as an apprentice electrician. Austin was booming, as it kind of always has been, since the 80s, and uh, was working, 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and just dove right into that. Found a place to live. Shortly after, my girlfriend moved to town, who's now my wife, and we got a place. And the music was just, man, it really was. It was everywhere, and it was a community, and there were a lot of open mics, and so I just started going to the open mics, like as many days as I could in a week.
In my mind, open mics aren't as prevalent now as they used to be, but also I'm an old crusty dude who would just never step into an open mic anymore. So maybe they are going on still, and I just don't know about them. But it did seem like when I moved to Chicago, there was, I mean, there'd be 3 or 4 open mics on any given night during the week. Like you had to choose which one to go to. It sounds like it was similar down there in Austin.
Oh yeah, yeah. There was a good one. There was a really good one almost every night of the week, every weeknight. And then you'd go out on the weekends and just see just so much good music. And again, you're probably right. There's probably still open mics. I know there are some, but again, I don't really go out to them, so I don't know. Uh, but there there were kind of like the higher end open mics. I'm sure from living in Austin for a bit, the Cactus Cafe,
Yeah.
the venerable folk venue on campus where Nancy Griffith and Lyle Lovett, got their starts at the open mic, um, and all the folk royalty would play there touring through. And so they had an open mic. I think it was Monday nights, and it was lottery. And I actually didn't do that one as much because by the time I would get off work at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, and then hustle across town to the Cactus, I was too late usually to get signed up. Or you would get signed up, and then you had to hope that your name got drawn,
Right.
and I had to get up at 5:45 in the morning to go wire houses. So I was like, I'm not going to sit this out unless I know I can be on the list. But that was a great one, and everybody swore by it because you could get a gig at the Cactus if you impressed the right people at the open mic. But the one that I loved was on Thursday nights down south in like a little strip mall. There was a place called Gino's Italian Bar and Grill,
Oh man.
and the Gino's open mic was ostensibly run by Rusty Weir, who was like
Oh,
a kind of a great Texas singer-songwriter. And the thing was that Rusty didn't really run the open mic. He would play a set after the open mic, but you were kind of, sucked into going down there because, oh, Rusty, it's a Rusty Weir thing. There's this other guy that ran the open mic. I forget his name, but the deal with the Gino was that everybody who signed up to play the open mic got a free plate of spaghetti and a small side salad and one alcoholic beverage for free.
dude. At that
And
age and at that
I
time,
have
that's
no
like,
idea. I have no idea. It was amazing. And so a lot of us songwriters would go down there simply to get the free meal. And then you also had this whole cast of like, kind of like borderline or straight up kind of homeless population that would come in with some form of musical performance art, spoken word stuff that would sign up because they knew that you could get the free meal. So it was it was this just bizarre, world where there, it was a great community.
yeah.
You're down there and you're getting free food to play music. I really don't know why they did it. I've never been able to wrap my head around what was in it for them giving away the food, but it was a pretty cool thing.
How much at that time did you feel the presence of the legacy of like past Austin music? Like, Towns Van Zandt had spent some time there, obviously Lucinda Williams, Blaze Foley. There's a really rich history, that you can get to know. How much was that kind of lore prevalent when you were there, or were you guys kind of on a different trip?
It was very prevalent, but I didn't know about it until really being there for a couple of years. I met a lot of people who were certainly you know, kind of travelers in that tradition, people that songwriters that had come there because of that tradition. And I was kind of an idiot about all of that. I didn't know. I absolutely moved to Austin pretty blind. I didn't know who Townes Van Zandt was. I didn't know who Guy Clark or the Flatland, you know, Jimmy Dale or Butch Hancock or Jerry Jeff Walker. I didn't know any of them. I had never heard of any of them. I moved to Austin because in college, I bought a cassette tape of the band Poi Dog Pondering that was from Austin, and I actually eventually moved to Chicago. And by the time I moved to Austin, they had already moved to Chicago. But I bought this cassette tape that was like for promotional purposes only, that was kind of a little EP with a bio, like a spoken word bio. So the lead singer talked about, you know, the start of the band, and he mentioned Austin. Mm-hmm. And that was stuck in my head, where I thought, well, that band is weird. They're like, you know, 18 people in the band, and they play all sorts of different kinds of music. And if they lived in Austin, it must be a cool place.
Right.
So I moved there, and I didn't know anything else about Austin. And I remember probably in the first 3 months I was there, a buddy invited me over one night to you know, drink whiskey and play songs. And so we were over there, and Anna Egge was with me, who's a songwriter who now lives in New York, who was one of my first friends when I moved to Austin. She was 19 years old, so I probably shouldn't out her. I don't think she was drinking whiskey that night. No, probably not. But we went over to a buddy's house to play guitars and drink. And midway into the party, our friend said, "Hey, we're all gonna go over to the Cactus because there's this great songwriter, Townes Van Zandt, playing." And this was in, you know, summer of '96, I think. And I think Anna knew who he was, but we were having such a good time playing guitars and drinking that we were like, we're not going over to this show. And I didn't know who he was. I was like, I've never heard of that guy. I'm not going anywhere. And so we didn't go, and it was the last time that Townes played the Cactus before he died. And I'd like to think that really we did what Townes would have done.
Right.
Had he been in that position, I'm sure he would have not gone to the Cactus and instead stayed to drink whiskey and play guitars.
Yeah, no question. He was with you there in spirit. It just goes to show, man, like when you're kind of making your living in sort of like a niche singer-songwriter type of mode, which is both what you and I do, it's hard to get people out to shows. Like even the people who would be 100% predisposed to coming out to your show, like younger singer-songwriters who would be into what you were doing, like it's even hard to get them out to the damn show. You know what I mean?
It's true. Absolutely. Yeah.
Who was on the scene at that time in Austin? Like who was a couple steps ahead of you, like playing the clubs there in Austin, where you were saying to yourself, well, if I could get a gig like so-and-so playing on a regular night, that's who I'd like to aspire to be like. Who was at that level at that time?
Definitely like Jimmy LaFave, Eliza Gilkison, Patty Griffin had just moved to town. And so she was still only a couple steps ahead, right when I got here. Mm-hmm. Michael Fracasso, there was kind of the whole Resentments scene, which was John D. Graham, Stephen Bruton. But there was a guy who actually used to run sound. There was this great little gig at a barbecue joint called Art's Rib House that ended up being across the street from the house that my wife and I eventually bought. A great barbecue, and every Monday night they had a show called Bummer Night, and it was Sarah Elizabeth Campbell, great Texas, kind of unsung Texas songwriter and performer. And every night at her Monday show, there would be a long break, like an hour break, where ostensibly all the musicians would go out back to get high. And she turned it into a gig where like you could kind of apply for the gig to show up and play the break at Bummer Night. And the sound guy at those shows was a young songwriter from Maine named Slade Cleaves. And Slade would run sound and then also get up and do a couple songs. And I remember thinking like, Man, Austin's for real. If the sound guy is like the best songwriter in the room, like this is, this is bonkers.
That's an abundance of talent there, man. To
Yeah.
be sure. You know, Austin really, it had then, it certainly still kind of had this when I moved there, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't know if it still has it now, but it was one of the few cities in the US where you could make a living with a regular residency in town, like once you got to that point. Did you ever go that route where you were playing like a residency in town, or did you go from the open mic thing to quitting your job and going on the road and playing? Hello?
I got really in the residency is so great.
Hey, Matt,
And
you
the
froze on me really
people,
quick. So can I get,
I didn't have a lot to compare it to.
hey,
Yeah.
Matt,
Am I back?
you froze on me really quick. So can you just start answering that question over again, please?
Sure. Am I back?
You're back. Yep.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, I dove really into the residency thing. I thought it was such a cool concept, and I didn't really have anything to compare it to. But once I started touring more, I did notice that it was much more of a thing in Austin than it seemed to be in other kind of bigger music cities. Like I didn't really see that same thing in LA and New York and San
No.
Francisco. Maybe it was happening in Nashville to a certain extent, but I at that time Nashville was very, very not cool.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I, I'm sure that's debatable now, but now it is more. There's more of a vibrant scene there now,
To be
um,
sure.
and I think it was kind of maligned by indie musicians back in the in the '90s as kind of the corporate place. But but yeah, I there was a point in time where I actually had three residencies a week in Austin.
Wow. So were you able to just make your living then, in Austin, banging out these residencies and, selling merchandise there? And was that about your living for a while?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, it
awesome.
was that and doing two or three tours a year and then regional weekend stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, just watching the like Tony Price, Bob Schneider model of like, you know, obviously they had bigger fan bases, but you don't need a huge fan base to make that workable, really.
No. Well, and also, I mean, I think that that's the way to go. If you can kind of replace the idea of local residency with, uh, I think the live stream now is the way to go, especially if you can monetize it to a certain degree, and that can be your quote unquote residency, and then doing a couple longer tours during the year, and then you just anytime you get an offer for a lucrative weekend somewhere, just pop out, rent a car, play a few gigs, and come the f home, man. No one needs
Yeah,
to be playing Monday night in Walla Walla, Washington, man.
nobody needs that. Not even Walla Walla, probably.
No, and believe me, I was there and I could tell from the looks on their faces that they definitely didn't need it
Yeah.
the first time I was there. Oh man. Uh, so at what point, how were you managing, you were working for a living, obviously it's even the title of your project, Matt the Electrician, like you were working and you were also playing music, you're also pursuing uh, this creative passion of yours. I think a lot of people have this question who are still in that position of working a job to make some dough, rendering under Caesar what is Caesar's. How did you make it work? How did you find time to make creative work and also do what you had to do to pay the rent or the mortgage?
Um, I mean, I've kind of always felt about creating is I've appreciated having kind of deadlines or having uh, like I feel like if I the more time I have, the less positive things I do with that time. you know, uh, years ago I was when I first had little kids, and I was doing some. I've kind of long done these songwriting games and having some sort of homework every week to keep myself writing and making stuff. But I was doing some sort of songwriting game and I had a song due the next day and I had little kids And so every day I had to pick up my daughter from daycare at some point, and there was like this, I'm sure you know this one well, but you'll have like this time period of naps, and sometimes you'll have like a 20-minute gap between like when you kind of pick up a kid and they're in the car seat still and they're still asleep, and you're trying to transport the car seat with the kid in it to some dark room to like close the door and just get 20 minutes before they're going to wake up. And there was a time frame where I feel like I wrote 3 or 4 songs that ended up on records, like in those 20-minute gaps, just whole songs, start to finish. And I think part of that was knowing that that's the time I had, then that's what I used. And I've felt like that over the years, that finding those little slivers of time, whether it's, late at night or early in the morning, or, middle of the day when your kid's asleep, that's always been like, I think, a more productive time for me than if I have an entire day to myself. I'll find myself coming up with all sorts of other things to do other than write or create.
It's pretty amazing. I will find myself, if I have that amount of time, it turns out, I don't know why, I would rather categorize things in my online QuickBooks for the business than write a song. What is that, man? I mean, that's a sickness. It's an absolute sickness, but I'd rather do it. It's like, it feels like, well, when you have the idea and you actually get into working on it, then you can get into like a flow state and you don't notice the time going by. But just sitting down to get that original idea, it's like someone dripping hot wax on your eyeballs or something like that, man. It's painful.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, like, to me, my ridiculous stage name is kind of a piece of that. And I say this totally in retrospect, because at the time it was I was very young, and it was an idea that I thought was kind of dumb, and a friend talked me into it, and I was like, all right, fine, I'll do this. As 25 years have gone by, I usually just end up explaining it and feeling ridiculous about it. But in retrospect, I kind of think there's some part of it that I did on purpose to keep myself from getting too precious about the art, and also reminding myself constantly that like, this is what we all have to do, some sort of work. And if that work is songwriting, great. And also we're lucky to get to write songs and make a living.
Right.
But constantly reminding myself that, like, at any moment I could be back in an attic running wire. And I think that's a good thing and a bad thing. Like, not a bad thing, but it's a reminder that, like, that labor is not that far away. And it's a positive thing to be able to do a thing with your hands and to make a living and to support yourself. And I don't want to get too far away from that.
Yes, it's sort of also a reminder that if you want to make some dough in this world, you got to do something useful for people. And that usefulness could be wiring up an attic, or it could be giving them a song that makes them feel different about the worst day of their life, or giving them a song that puts into context falling in love with someone that they're dating for the first time. Or that's a useful thing for people. That's something that
Yeah.
if you make something like that, if you're a good electrician, people will trip over themselves for you to wire up their house because they want it done right. And if you write a song that touches someone's heart, they will trip over themselves to find a way to give you money. I've found.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Matt's stage name came about as a serendipitous accident. He just happened to be an electrician when he got his start, and his audiences dubbed him Matt the Electrician. Maybe that name, though, has a usefulness to him as an artist. Maybe it's a good reminder of how tough it can be to make $1, and how lucky you are if you get to hang your own shingle and work for yourself, particularly in the arts. Once you've been doing creative work long enough, it can be easy to lose touch with the grounding reality of tough, dirty, impersonal hard work. In some ways, Matt's stage name does not give him the luxury of forgetting that. The poet Philip Levine never forgot what it was like to actually work. In fact, he made work his muse, and that is captured perfectly in his poem, Making It Work. 3-foot blue canisters of nitro along a conveyor belt. Slow fish speaking the language of silence. On the roof, I, in my respirator, patching the asbestos gas lines as big around as the thick waist of an oak tree. These here are the veins of the place, stuff insides the blood. We work in rain, heat, snow, sleet. First warm spring winds up from Ohio, I pause at the top of the ladder to take in the wide world reaching downriver and beyond. Sunlight dumped on standing and moving lines of freight cars. New fields of bright weeds blowing, scoured valleys, false mountains of coke and slag. At the ends of sight, a rolling mass of dark clouds, as dark as money, brings the weather in. Over time, your life has changed a lot from that earlier stage. How has your creative process shifted? How is it different now than it was in that earlier time with kids, with another job, all that? What does it look like now?
I've found over the years that I think once those natural kind of constrictions, restrictions existed having a day job, once those went away and I was just left sometimes with entire days, once the kids really go to school full time, you have these full days, staring you down. And so I've created a lot more restrictions for myself.
Like what are those specifically? You mentioned earlier, you said you had a song due at a certain point, and that sounds like it's a self-imposed, there's not some professor who's going to be flunking you if you don't turn that in. So what are those restrictions that you put in place for yourself?
I create a lot of games for myself, but I'm involved in some songwriting games. There's a local guy here, Bob Schneider, that's run several songwriting games for like the last 30 years, and I've been in one for about 20 years, which is a song a week for 20 years. And
you've written a song a week for 20 years.
I mean, to be fair, like there are times where I've been in 3 games, just like the residencies thing. I like having more to do, and so I run my own game. Bob has a game that I've been in, and there have been times where I've been in 3 games a week for the last 20 years. So I've written often 3 songs a week for the last 20 years. And it's important to note that like most of those are garbage. And that and what I love about the games is you know, you really do write just to write. It becomes an exercise. And I think for a lot of people, they can just there's a self-imposed way that they can set up a schedule, and they can get up in the morning and I'm going to journal for an hour. And I tried that. I tried a lot of the treat writing as a job, get up and do it every day. And if I have no parameters to that, I just don't do it. I'll find something else to do.
Yeah.
But if there's parameters, if I know that somebody else or even myself is kind of watching me, and I create accountability by having other people say in an online game, with that accountability, which is shocking to me because I didn't really like school that much, but having that homework, having a deadline, really does it, and it keeps me writing. Even on days where I don't have that deadline, I'll keep creating just because I know I have it kind of all around me.
Got it. So it's not just a constriction where you just wait to the deadline every time. It actually kind of changes how you write in general because you're anticipating that deadline.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think making it feel like a game, which again, I kind of prefer that approach. I prefer the idea of thinking about it as fun and games as opposed to letting it get too precious to me, which I think a lot of us do naturally. I think a lot of writers that I know do that, but also prefer maybe not to talk about it as much to kind of preserve that mystique.
Mm.
And I certainly know when I was younger, that was very much the case. You didn't find writers that would talk about it as like, hey, this is fun and this is a game and this is, I think that's more normalized now. You look at, Tweety's got that new book out, that is, I don't know if you've read it, the One Song Now book.
No, I haven't read it. No.
Oh man, it's beautiful, but it's very similar to the way that I and a lot of my friends kind of approach songwriting, and I think that's more normalized to talk about that. And I think when I was younger, there was this idea that there were a few kind of chosen, geniuses in the range of Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and Leonard Cohen, and songs came to them and they were special, and they created these precious jewels that they could then offer up to the rest of us in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And you just had to wait around for that lightning bolt to strike you, and then you start reading about a lot of these people, and like, oh, it turns out that they just write all the time,
Yeah.
and they write and they practice their craft, and so whatever you can do to figure out how best to get that done on a daily basis.
What has that process made you a lot better at? And that can be an uncomfortable thing to talk about. I think a lot of us as artists, we can be more comfortable talking about, well, I'm kind of weak at this. I got to work on that. But surely writing that much and having that sort of discipline for a couple decades, surely you have to be much better at a couple things in the songwriting process. So what's something that you started out and maybe it wasn't your greatest strength, but through this process, it's been a muscle that has been built up and that you're pretty damn good at now?
I mean, I think the more you practice anything, the ability to kind of let go of stuff midstream, and also to edit,
Mm-hmm.
that was the thing I hated the most early on about writing and songwriting, specifically, was I wanted to be able to just write a thing and have it come out fully formed and not have to go back. And I think the torturous thing about going back and editing is having to get rid of things that you've already written, or let go of the way something goes. And so I feel like now starting to write something and immediately realizing like, oh, the chorus could be the verse, or the verse could be the chorus, or all of this could be different chords, or, you know, the multitude of ways to go are endless. And I think, you know, that can also be overwhelming in its own way, but that channeling that ability to trust yourself to let go and rearrange things and not hang on to whatever, again, whatever precious jewel you've created at the middle of a song, to me feels like, you know, a bit of a superpower that I've, you know, adapted over time. And
So to be clear, when you're talking about letting go, you're talking about the idea of letting go maybe what you were sure the song was going to be about when you began, or letting go of something that you were sure was brilliant with the song at the start, and you let go of it because the song reveals itself to be something different, or reveals that it needs something else besides that.
yeah, I think this the second thing you said, the, the idea that songs, you know, sometimes you're gonna get, you know how it is with, you sometimes get lightning in a bottle and you write a song fully formed in 10 minutes that sometimes is still the best song you've ever written.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you write a piece of something that you really, really love, and it takes you weeks, months, years to kind of turn that into something uh, that becomes a song that you love also. And I, you know, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. But when I'm writing now, I feel like I will let the playfulness in a lot easier and quicker if I feel like I'm if I feel like I'm treating something too precious. I'm much more likely now to destroy it purposefully, not forever, but just to see what happens. So if there is something that I love and is very important to me in the middle of a song, I'm now much more likely to strip it out or turn it on its head just to see what that process, see if it takes me in a different direction. Sometimes that means you come back to the same thing and you go, no, I was right at the beginning. This is a thing. But
Yeah.
letting go of that protectiveness, I think.
So you're basically like, okay, that wasn't a cosmetic wall that I knocked down. That was a load bearing wall. We need to go back
Right,
and put
right,
the load bearing wall back in.
right. Exactly. I love the carpentry metaphors for all of this.
Yeah. So talk to me then about this new record that you just made with Tucker Martine. You head back to the Pacific Northwest where you hail from to make this thing. Did you write this thing all in advance, or did you wait till you got up there and you wrote when you were in studio? How did you begin the process with them?
It was 90% of it was written. There was a little bit of kind of moving stuff around once we got up there, um, but no, I came into the studio with the songs and really like there was more kind of melodic and sonic stuff that was written while we were there. Like the songs were not fully formed in terms of what the band was going to do and what the other musicians were going to do, and so there was a lot of and also what Tucker was going to do, because his pre-production, you know, the way he kind of approaches pre-production, or at least with me, and we talked about it ahead of time, was there is no pre-production. You know, you kind of go in, there's a little bit of here's some demos, and I played some songs for him acoustically, but I love thinking of the studio or the producer or the engineer or all of those things as kind of another instrument in the band, and especially in this setting, I really wanted that to be a thing. I didn't want to come in there with totally fully formed ideas about what we were doing and kind of let, you know, Tucker roll with it.
That that is how I think and how I've always thought records should be made. But when you're a guy like you and me, who, you know, we're kind of, our profit margins aren't exactly buying us Land Rovers anytime soon. So I know for me personally, and I'm sure this has to be to a certain degree with you as well, it's really scary to commit to a process like that, because you're like, look, man, economically, I got one shot to make this record. Like, this can't not work when we go in. So I can, in the past, I've fooled myself into thinking like, well, I have to prepare ahead of time because this can't not work. Um, how did you, how did you deal with those feelings of anxiety, which I'm sure must have cropped up to a certain degree?
Well, I mean, due to the the magical nature of crowdfunding and microfinancing of things. That was how I approached this. Was like, I'm going to come up with this amount of money. We're going to get a budget from Tucker. We still have, we had very real, parameters for the time that was going to be spent, and it wasn't, this was not going into the, booking the studio for 2 months and just like, hanging out, chatting about our philosophies on what it was going to sound like. It was also coming from I made in the past. We would budget 3 days for tracking and 3 days for mixing. So I that was what I was used to, and so being able to budget 2 weeks for tracking and 2 weeks for mixing felt super luxurious to me.
Mm.
Which again, I think it's all relative depending on what your experience is, but that was a thing that we were able to afford because of the Kickstarter,
Hmm.
and so that felt like a ton of time to me. And once you get to the end, there's always that, oh, if we had one more day, we'd do this one thing. But man, I really, it was such a luxurious experience.
Were you in there for the mix?
Yeah.
What did that look like? I'm always in different people. There's a million ways to skin a cat, and there's a million ways to mix a record. I'm always really interested to see behind the curtain how different guys and different gals do it. What did that mix process look like, and how did it compare to other mixes that you had been a part of in the past?
Um, well, I mean, something that I kind of learned over the years, and Tucker obviously already knows this, and so it was helpful for both of us, is you don't go in, you don't go in at the first hour. So every day I would wait 2 or 3 hours into the session to go in, because there's no point in sitting in the couch in the back of the room while they're dialing in all the first tweaks and stuff. Because I think if your brain and your ears hear all of that, you're not. Yeah, it's really hard for me to then listen to the finished thing and have any idea what I'm hearing. So that's one piece, which again, we didn't even really discuss that much. I just said, hey, I'm not going to come in till later, and he was like, that's perfect.
Great.
Yeah, and so that way you give him a little head start, and so by the time I would get in there, it would be lunchtime, and we would chat a little bit, and then you're basically getting to hear the first kind of rough mix. Uh,
Yes.
as the first thing you're doing. And then the second thing that he does that I really appreciate is he utilizes in his mixing a disco ball, which I think is great because it's just enough to kind of like really confuse most musicians, and it just kind of scatters your brain your brain, because he just puts on the disco ball and you're sitting in the room and you're like, man, there's so many lights, you feel a little dizzy, and I think it recalibrates the way you listen to things. And of course, I'm kind of kidding, but also not. Like it when we first got there, even when we were tracking, the first day we did 4 takes of something with the band all at once, and this was with a drummer who had never heard the songs really, who lived up in Portland, and a bass player and guitar player who were from Austin, and they knew the songs a little bit, but like we were all kind of just faking it. And we had done like 4 takes, and we go into the control room, and he turns on the disco. He's got the like incense going, and he turns on the disco ball, and I was like, oh man, this is a great device. Like, I don't know what his intentions are really. We never totally talked about it, but I think it has a way of kind of disarming you a little bit. And yeah, it was a great thing. And even through the mixing, it puts you in this certain mood, or confuses you a little bit.
A little bit of confusion can be can be useful. And I love that idea of not going in until the mix is a certain way along. I just had an album mixed remotely because of COVID reasons.
Sorry.
And what I actually, at first I looked at that as a restriction that wasn't great, but actually what it turned out to be was, hey man, how about you make these drums sound great? And I'm just like out at the pool with my kid while you make these drums sound great. And then, I'll get involved in the process when it's like, vocal needs to be a little bit louder. Pan the guitar to the right or something like that. But it's, we don't know what the hell we're doing as songwriters as far as the engineering goes. You know what I mean? We just know that, like, usually the note is just going to be like, I could use a little bit more vocal. That's about it.
Right. Well, and I think that's part of it, especially, this is, for me, this is like 12 records in,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm paying a fairly well-known producer quite a bit of money to do his job that I'm hiring him to do because I'm impressed with the job that he does. So yeah, I don't really want to sit in the room and micromanage his choices. Like, he is the other instrument. Like, we all played our instruments and now he is going to play his instrument. So at the end of each thing, at the end of each tune, for me, I'm just listening through, like you say, to say, oh, sometimes I like a little bit more bass, or,
right.
And even with that, I'm saying, if that's what you think would sound good.
If that's workable, if that is not, that was always a note that I like to give to mix engineers. It's like, can we do this change that I'm talking about and not have this whole thing fall apart like a house of cards? Because if this is a we were talking about load-bearing walls in songs earlier. When it comes to a mix, there can be load-bearing parts of like, nah, dude, we're not panning that guitar hard right because it's going to take apart the whole mix if we do that,
Right. Right. Well, and I think also working with a producer who's also an engineer, you're looking for a sound, some sort of sonic realm that you've heard them create in the past. And with Tucker, he's produced so many brilliant records and in so many genres of music,
Mm-hmm.
this kind of indie rock, jazz world, kind of, some of the punk rock world. He's done all this different stuff. And the through line for me was this space. There's this width to his sound that I don't know how to describe because that's not my job, but I loved it. And I feel like we got that in the record that I made with him. And I don't think that's accomplished if I'm sitting there going,
yeah.
I don't know that I want to hear my voice more. Like, maybe I don't. Maybe I've made 11 records and I heard my voice too much. And maybe now he's got the right idea,
Well, it sounds like you were exercising your superpower of letting go there, letting go control. I really appreciate you coming on the show, my friend. It's been great to talk to you. Congratulations Absolutely. On the new record, and I hope it all goes swimmingly, man.
Oh, thanks, Joe.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Matt the Electrician's forthcoming album is entitled We Imagined an Ending, and it's slated for release on November 5th of this year. Go to matttheelectrician.com to pre-order a copy. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.